Hi, Nathaniel here, and today I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the United Kingdom. As you know, their Prime Minister Boris Johnson won the prime ministership on the campaign promise of one thing: to get out of the EU, to fulfill the referendum vote from several years ago to leave the European Union. It was his only campaign promise, and he's been struggling in this process of getting the United Kingdom out of the European Union with or without a deal. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a background on just what is going on. One, Boris Johnson is an American. He's the only person who could be both the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and, if he so chose, to later move to the United States, spend 5 years in the country, and run for President of the United States, because he was born in New York City. I have had a chance to meet him. He's quite a nice guy. He's where I learned where the term John, referring to a toilet, comes from, because a guy by the name of John invented the thing for the Queen of England. So this random nonsense that I learned from Boris Johnson. His family, his heritage is Turkish, actually, and they immigrated to the United Kingdom. And then his family came to the U.S., where he was born, then back to the United Kingdom. He was also the lovable Tory mayor of London for quite some time. He later became a minister in Theresa May's cabinet, but resigned that post once he felt that Prime Minister May was not doing a thorough job on getting the United Kingdom out of the European Union, which she was tasked to do. Now, what this whole thing has to come down about, there was a referendum in the United Kingdom several years ago now, and they voted to leave the European Union. This was called Brexit. The term Brexit comes originally from Grexit and Exit and Sprexit, when the Greece financial meltdown was happening, and there was discussion about having Greece be removed from the European Union, so Grexit, and then this is basically the same thing applies, so Brexit. There's a whole lot of information I want to give you about that term, but not some other time. Anyway, so they had this vote several years ago. The thing is that the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave. The reason why is simple, that the United Kingdom is not able to make independent trade negotiations outside of what the EU negotiates. It is also required to accept anyone else in the European Union, citizens, to come into the United Kingdom without many checks or balances or anything really. And with the fluctuation of so many people that the EU itself has not vetted, and the problems which have been increasing really, to an epidemic levels in Germany, France, and the Nordic countries, the European people are dealing with this problem, and the Britons don't want to have to deal with it as well. It also has a lot more to do with trade, more to do with trade than anything else. If the UK remains in the European Union, there will always be limited on the amount of trade and who they can trade with and their trading partners. That's a problem that they're dealing with in the United Kingdom. So they can't just go make an independent trade deal with the United States or Canada or actually any other member of the Commonwealth, of the British Commonwealth, like say India or Australia or New Zealand, anywhere where the Queen is actually the head of state, and there's a Prime Minister who's the head of government. The British government can't go make a deal with them because those countries aren't in the EU, and the EU hasn't negotiated anything specific with them for the United Kingdom and those countries. So that's a big stickler for a lot of people in Britain. Also, Britain's not a really full-fledged member. I mean, they don't use the euro. They still use the pound. So they never really have been all in to this European Union thing. They're not the only country, really, that does this. There are other countries that we kind of do everything the EU does, but we keep our own currency, and we don't really participate so much. But Britain's been kind of on the fence. And the referendum several years ago was to leave. And David Cameron resigned his position. Even he did push for it, but he didn't think he was the guy to remove England from the UK from the European Union. So Theresa May came in to do that. She had no idea what she was doing, was way outclassed by the opposition. And now Boris Johnson, the Britain Trump, who, and I must say, he looks a lot like Donald Trump. He's tall, he's got the shaggy blonde hair, and he doesn't really care what the media thinks. He has a lot of associations with what Trump does and how Trump operates. They are both from New York City. So, since he's been the prime minister, this happened. Actually, I remember I was actually hanging out with Vice President Mike Pence the day that Boris Johnson became prime minister of the United Kingdom, and we were talking about how historic it was that Boris Johnson, was now going to be the prime minister, and that he only had one goal. He only had one thing. His entire campaign to become prime minister was geared around one thing: leave the European Union. And he's making steps to do it either with or without a deal. Now, Brussels isn't going to negotiate any further. Brussels came up with what would have been satisfactory for them, for the United Kingdom to move on. That's to deal with all the trade, the shipping, the EU members living in the United Kingdom, the members of Britain, the British citizens that are living in the European Union, the traveling back and forth, the visa thing, and Northern Ireland, Ulster. Ulster is actually part of the United Kingdom, not part of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. So they're having a deal with just how that's going to work, because there would have to be a border now, and it would have a limitation on trade and being able to cross that border. And for everyone on the island of Ireland, this is pretty important, because they had, up until recently, routine attacks of terror. In fact, the Cranberries song "Zombie" actually stems from a terrorist attack bombing in Ireland in 1993. So it's still relatively current in most people's minds in Ireland. And so that's going to have to be something that they're going to have to address, because if the United Kingdom removes itself from the European Union completely, but then doesn't address these issues and without having a deal, this flag behind me, which most of it actually all stems from different parts of the British Empire, the Scottish cross, the English cross, and the cross that represents the Irish, all come together in this Union Jack, and that might change if those individual areas decide they don't want to be part of the United Kingdom no more and want to become part of the European Union again. Scotland's a big issue on this, and also Ulster, Northern Ireland, is a big part of this discussion internally with the United Kingdom, apart from the negotiations with the United Kingdom and Brussels. As far as my personal opinion, I have nothing at stake in this. I think at this point, the reason why it's been so hard for Britain to make a deal is that they think they can just get more and more time. And by Boris Johnson forcing the issue to where on Halloween they're out, there is no extending it, you would force many of those ministers and those representatives in the British Parliament to do something. They wouldn't have a choice but to act. And I think that's what it's going to take. I think that what's really going to come down to it is they're not going to have the chance of an extension or a delay. The fact that they have to do something by October 31st might be just what is required. It might be the only thing that really gets these politicians to actually do something, because a lot of them have, there's a lot of elitism in politics, and in Britain, there's no shortage of it. And a lot of the elites, for them, leaving the European Union is, not in their best interest. But for the people of the United Kingdom, the ability to have better trade options, the ability to have, a government that governs themselves versus the mainland part of Europe that has so much governing power over, their lives, that it's really in the best interest for the people of Britain. And I really encourage Boris Johnson to keep up the good fight, to get the United Kingdom out of the European Union, because then we can see, if you see, the unemployment in Great Britain starting to drop, if you see that people who, from the European Union being moved back to the mainland, and British subjects getting the prime choice for different positions and different jobs, and you see the British being in charge of their own economy versus having to subsidize any part of Europe, or have to rely on Europe to subsidize anything in Britain. If they are reliant on themselves, you might see a couple of things happen. One, the pound might gain some strength, which it has fallen quite a bit in the last couple of years. And you might also see the people of England start to, and the Welsh and Scotland and Ireland, the North Country and the Low Country, all maybe even rally together to make themselves a stronger union. So it's in the United Kingdom's best interest to give it a shot, to give it a go, to see what can be done. All of South America will be open for trade. The Americas will be open for trade in the United States, Canada, Australia, India. The ability for them to trade, the ability for them to work with Hong Kong individually outside the European Union would maybe allow the situation in Hong Kong to change in the people of Hong Kong's favor, because Britain would have more control over a lot of their trade policies and a lot of their foreign policy. The European Union has been restrictive, and that's the reason why you see the unemployment in Europe so high. The reason why you've seen so many people never graduate from college in European nations, because, well, why? Because there's no jobs. It's just not in their best interest to try to give it a go. And by doing this, you're going to start making changes to where it makes it more feasible to be in more control of your destination and your destiny, versus relying on what someone in Brussels has to do with how your economy can and cannot react to things. So I'm really supportive of Boris Johnson. I wish him all the best. Give him all you got, Boris. And I hope we'll be excited to see how the next 2 months plays out. And if you have any ideas or comments, please leave them below. And yeah, so that's kind of it for this one. Everyone in Iowa, I hope you're following this, because I think this is really important information, a really big thing in world history. And I think, Iowans, we take pride on being able to be knowledgeable on all this stuff, because it will impact local politics through the presidential races eventually. And it's just important that we all stay up to date on all of this really fascinating stuff in world history. So stay healthy, stay wealthy, stay wise, and as always, stay classy, Iowa.